I'd like to talk a little bit about editing truth, single photos. Before actually talking about editing skills and tools and software, we need to talk about why and when we edit in the first place. We live in a time of instantaneous visual imagery. There's digital cameras, editing softwares, and apps everywhere. Just as quickly as a photojournalist can capture an image, the image is transmitted for the world to see. Picture editors, therefore, which includes you, must have the competence and confidence to make good decisions with very little time, usually. Your responsibility as purveyors of visual information is then significant and important. The world is intensely visual, and so therefore news is largely visual. Countless people come to understand the world through still and moving photos. Effective photographic reporting requires a sound ethical decision-making strategy. Your duty as a picture editor is to honestly and accurately edit photographs that represent the story at hand. All the ethical dimensions of journalism apply to picture editing. These dimensions include weighing the public's right to know against an individual's right to be left alone, minimizing personal harm, avoiding conflicts of interest, and creating a reliable portrait of the world. The visceral impact of a powerful picture editing process and the ease with which people can manipulate photos make ethical guidelines that much more important. So your first step, remember your journalistic integrity. Even if you're not a journalism major, think truth, verification, reliable sources of information. Excellent journalism is a blend of the accurate and the aesthetic. The news value of a story should always be high on your checklist, as your news organization defines the news. Audience impact should always be one of your guiding principles. Let's look at this example from Paul Hansen. This is a photo from the Gaza Strip. And the journalist won the photo of the year in 2013 for Spot News, first prize for single photo. In this case, the photo was shot as a picture in a raw file, which means straight and unprocessed from the camera's computer. Using just the one frame, he used software which produced several versions of the image with varying tonal ranges. So the original looked very different than what you see here. The original had much less darkness and emotion in it in terms of its editing, obviously not the faces, which they were as they were. But combining some of the different versions of the image with different tonal ranges, it then created a different image that was much different than the original. So in this particular case, the award was taken back from Paul Hansen. He was caught, so to speak, with too much editing of his photo. Minimize unnecessary harm. The people that you photograph, the people that are close to the people that you photograph, and the surrounding community will all be affected by the photos that you post. Always make time to talk with reporters, if you are only the photographer for a particular story, about the photographic content that they expect to understand the connection between the story that will be written by someone else, if that is different than who you are, and the related photograph that you are taking. Let's look at another example. This was a photo from 2013 in Syria. Photographer Narciso Contreras removed the camera that is seen in the original, which is the top photo, in order to submit the final photo, which is the lower photo. He cloned other pieces of the background, pasting them into the space where the camera was. This was a big deal. News and documentary organizations have built some consensus about what is not acceptable. Material alteration to the image by including or excluding a certain item seems to be a standard everyone can agree on, as illustrated here in this particular story. The Newswire severed ties with Contreras, saying that it will remove his work from its publicly available photo archives, including photos from Syria, that along with the work of other photographers helped net the AP a 2013 Pulitzer Prize. So this was quite a big consequence to remove all of his photos, not just this one. But it is very difficult to continue to trust someone once they have made a mistake. The story is obviously heartbreaking. Contreras is a hardworking and talented photographer who was probably operating under extreme duress. But in the end, his case was not controversial. There is a bright line around adding or removing content. Contreras clearly crossed that line. So cropping is a fundamental skill that must be mastered during the development of your picture editing process. A fitting comparison can be found in editing a sentence, the building block of a written narrative or story. When you edit a sentence for clarity and meaning, you often remove unnecessary words. You reshape the sentence to focus and clarify the meaning and message. The exact same principle can be applied to pictures. The integrity and essential truth of the photograph resides within its four-sided composition. Cropping allows the photographer and editor to reshape that structure and potentially reshape its meaning and message. As I said before, this is often a necessary step, given that the life of the photographer witnesses is rarely simple, picturesque, and uncluttered. When photographers witness the fast-paced, unpredictable, complicated world, they make deliberate choices regarding subject and perspective, and they crop as an integral step in composition inside the viewfinder. I actually call editing that the very first step that begins with picking up a camera versus a voice recorder. You choose your medium, how to tell your story, and then you inevitably edit/crop the moment that you point your camera in one direction versus another. We call that in-camera cropping because the photographic constellation rarely aligns so perfectly. Cropping a photograph can occur either before or after the picture is taken. If cropping happens during coverage, then the photographer has appropriately isolated an object within his or her viewfinder. The cropping process is best described within journalistic circles as editing for emphasis and impact within the photographic composition. To crop for clarity, you eliminate unnecessary or distracting elements within the photographic composition. To crop for focus, you emphasize certain visual information and maintain visual context and continuity. To crop for design, you eliminate unnecessary, distracting, or distasteful details within the photograph's composition. To crop for telling the truth, you are considering the accuracy and veracity of the moment that you are witnessing. And finally, to crop for impact, there is numerous software programs that allow you to reshape the physical dimensions of the photograph's composition on your computer or also on your smartphone, increasingly in the digital camera itself. Such programs allow you to quickly and precisely apply measure crops and undo mistakes immediately. However, none of these technical solutions can replace the critical thinking and skillful consideration that picture editors bring to the process. A few additional tips on cropping. Never crop at the joints. Watch for kneecaps, for shoulders, for the neck, for waistline. You want to leave all the necessary body parts in or the suggestion that there is a body part rather than cropping at the joint exactly. Negative space is an interesting thing to consider. It is storytelling. It contains information, yet other times it doesn't. Look at these two images and think about how they would look if they were cropped in tighter. You would leave out so much context. Likewise, with these two images, if you cropped in tighter, you would lose some of the feeling and mood of the moment when the photos are captured. A few final thoughts on ethical editing. This particular image that was shot in Japan in 2011 after the tsunami struck. Always consider the people in the image first. However, reporters have to think about the audience. How do you tell the story of the impact of such a natural tragedy? Who are we responsible to in this particular instance? To the person we are photographing, their family, or are there other stakeholders to consider? We cannot be the know-it-all and the final decision makers. This is why we work in a group in a news organization. This is why we talk to our editors all the time. Be mindful also in this particular case of cultural differences. Death may be harder to see in some cultures. The United States is pretty notorious for not showing death, not showing bodies. Also, there might be generational distinctions in terms of how people expect to see the news represented. Whose criteria and judgment is brought to bear is a question editors consider all the time. This is another image from 2011 that the New York Times ran on its front page. It's an image of an explosion in Libya. Ethics are not situational only. The organization needs to have some guiding principles to be prepared with when something happens, and you bring credibility over a lifetime, which you can also lose overnight. These two images side by side, the one from Japan and the one of this explosion in Libya, reminds us that war is ugly. Natural disasters are ugly. But people should see what war is like. People should see what death looks like in a community. This is what we typically see in Hollywood movies. So we should show what war and tragedy and pain looks like in reality. These things happened. If you compare the two images, the first one is personal. Here it is again. And the second one is impersonal, yet it is just as truthful. It is an overall wide establishing shot. But we can't only show the overall. These images relate to life and death decisions. They are not meant to be aesthetic. Finally, please review the Washington Post hierarchy of photos in your textbook. Pay close attention to the explanation of the types of photos that editors look for. At the very least, informational. At the very most, or the most desired, would be emotional and intimate photos. Look at the next slide to see if you can think like an editor in terms of the desirability of photos.